Good afternoon, everyone. So I welcome you all, those who are present here and those who are attending our clinical combined round through web. So as always, we tell our students that there's nothing shortcut to detailed history taking and examination. So medicine is all about having contact, high contact with patient. But this COVID has given us the great challenge, but we are not going to give up. So here is a patient who is very interesting, and my senior resident, Dr. Sandeep and Dr. Dheeraj would be presenting the case as well as the review of literature. Followed by, we'll take up your questions. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Dheeraj Mittal, SR Rheumatology. Today's CCR presentation from Department of Rheumatology. Our patient is a 24-year-old lady from Delhi. She is a graduate, housewife, and there is no known comorbidity in her. She presented at AIIMS on 4th of August 2020 with a complaint of fever for 4 months, dry cough for 4 months, loss of weight for 4 months, and dry mouth for last 2 months. On history of presenting illness, her fever was low to moderate grade, maximum recorded temperature was 101 degree Fahrenheit. There is history of evening rise of temperature, which was associated with body ache also. However, there is no history of any sweating, and it responded to paracetamol very well. Dry cough was there mostly during the daytime. It was not associated with any chest pain or postnasal drip, and there is no postural variation was there. She also had some skin lesion over the bilateral shins, which were painful, raised, and erythematous, and they resolved over the period of 2 weeks spontaneously. This is the representative image of cutaneous lesion. On further history, there was history of bilateral eye uveitis, which was there simultaneously, and it was associated with pain. Typical feature of uveitis like pain, photophobia, increased lacrimation, and blurring of vision. There is no history of any pleural discharge or gritty sensation. It subsided within 2 weeks with some medication from outside, and there is no history of any similar episode in the past. She also had history of loss of appetite, loss of weight. Around 15 kg of weight was lost around over 4 months, and she had a history of large joint arthralgia involving both knees and ankles. She had history of dry mouth for last 2 months, which was manifested in difficulty in talking, chewing, and swallowing, and she required frequent sips of water while eating her meals. And there was history of associated painless facial swelling, especially in the parotid area, which resolved over the 20 days. She also noticed some painless nodal swelling in the bilateral submandibular area also. So on further probing the patient for negative history, there was no history of any dry eyes or orbital swelling, no history of any dyspnea or hemoptysis, no history of hematuria, frothy urine, no history of any malaria, photosensitivity, alopecia, Raynaud's phenomena or muscle weakness, no history of any inflammatory back pain, neck pain, enthesitis, dactylitis, IBD or psoriasis. There is no history of any night sweats, chronic diarrhea, recurrent infection or hospitalization. There is no history of any jaundice, even past or present, and there is no history of any pain abdomen also. No history of any neurological deficit and neuropathic pain. On past history, nothing significant. No history of any type 2 diabetes, hypertension, pulmonary TB or malignancy. No history of any radiation exposure of blood transfusion. Menstruation and obstetric history was normal. On treatment history, she has received multiple courses of antibiotic in view of suspected typhoid fever from the outside without any significant improvement. On clinical examination, she was conscious oriented, thin build with BMI of 18.4 kg per meter square, with pulse rate of 84 per minute, BP was 100.40 and 82, and vitals were essentially normal. No pallor, cyanosis, clubbing, pedal edema or lymphadenopathy. On examination, there was bilateral submandibular nodular swelling, which was there around size of 3 into 2 centimeter, which was mildly tender. This is the photograph of clinical photograph of that time, and it is especially noticeable in this photograph very beautifully. On clinical examination, systemic examination was unremarkable, and also musculoskeletal examination was also not any remarkable findings were there. So on the first visit, she had some reports with her. On reviewing that reports, hemogram was essentially normal. Sodium was slightly on the higher side of upper limit. Calcium was normal. Phosphorus was normal. And ultrasound abdomen showed mild hepatosplenomegaly. So on the basis of these clinical and examination finding, we kept a differential diagnosis of sarcoidosis, Sjogren's syndrome, lymphoma, HIV, and IgG4 related disease. And from the symptomatic wise, we actually kept the possibilities, and more or less suspicion of sarcoidosis was kept. Now there was a CCT neck, chest and abdomen which was there, which was done on the 1st of July 2020 from outside. My radiology colleague will discuss it.
Good afternoon, everyone. Now we'll be looking at the CCT neck, chest and abdomen, which was done dated 1st of July 2020. These are the sections corresponding to the neck. Here we can see that there is diffuse bilaterally symmetrical enlargement of the bilateral submandibular glands as marked by the arrows. There is no abnormal focal lesion that we can see. Similarly, you can see here in the second image that there is diffuse enlargement of the bilateral parotid glands. Again, no differential focal lesion is noted. So here we can see diffuse bilateral symmetrical enlargement of submandibular and parotid glands. Going to the sections, CT sections of the mediastinum. Here, as the arrow is showing, this is the enlarged homogeneously enhancing right paratracheal node. In this second image, we can see that there is this oblong enlarged aortopulmonary window node. We can also see bilateral hilar lymph nodes in the third and fourth image. So we can see homogeneously enhancing non-necrotic mediastinal nodes which are enlarged as marked by the arrows. In the HRCT lung windows, we can see multiple bilateral micronodules which are typically distributed in the subpleural location. Along with that, we can also see that there is this peribronchial thickening, most markedly seen here. You can see that there is peribronchovascular distribution of the nodules. There is also some fissural thickening which is evident here. So bilateral, no apicobasal gradient, multiple nodules, micronodules in a typical perilymphatic distribution is what we are seeing in the lung windows. In the abdominal sections, we can see that there is mild hepatomegaly which is seen here in the axial and the coronal image. There is mild hepatomegaly which is evident. In the kidneys here, we can see that the left kidney showing this mild hydronephrosis which is noted here in this section. And in the corresponding inferior section, we do note here that there are tiny calculi, right nephrolithiasis, and we can see this left proximal uretrix calculus, which explains this mild hydronephrosis on the left side. So basically, these were the radiological findings that we could see from head to abdomen.
So after that, to further narrow down our diagnosis, we had a second visit on 4th of September 2020. On that, we had some investigation which was ordered. Hemogram was initially essentially normal. There is again hypernatremia was there, hypercalcemia was there. Viral marker, especially hepatitis B, C, and HIV 1 and 2 was non-reactive. On further investigation, ACE level was elevated, IgG4 was normal, ANA was negative. ENA profile showed anti-Rho and La negative. However, PMSCL was 2 positive. Thyroid and sugar level was normal. Urine was no abnormality detected. However, on reviewing her 24-hour urine volume, urine calcium report, we noted that patient is having a 24-hour urine output of 7,000 milliliter per day. So that's a interesting finding which we found. Patient did not complain of that. And that's where the case make me so interesting in this, which is suggestive of polyuria in this patient. Along with that, there is hypercalciuria of 24-hour urine calcium was 823. So for that polyuria, we actually further done our to further narrow down our diagnosis. We got serum osmolality and urine osmolality done, which was showing urine osmolality of 212, which is quite low, and a serum osmolality which was normal 289. 24-hour urine creatinine, sodium, potassium and chloride was within normal limits. We had a 2 biopsy in this patient, right submandibular gland biopsy and a minor salivary gland biopsy, which will be discussed by pathologically.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'll be discussing the histopathology of the 2 biopsies that were received for this patient. So the first biopsy that we had received for this patient was that from a right submandibular gland. So we had received multiple cores, and as we can see in these slides, there were multiple. There was normal ceroid gland parenchyma along with multiple non-necrotizing granulomas in various areas. Now these granulomas, I'll show a higher part, were periductal in location. They were mostly naked granulomas. There were numerous giant cells also seen. We can see this in the higher part here. There were numerous giant cells. We had done a lot of special stains on this. So the acid pass bacilli were negative on renal incidence state. We had also run fungal stains which were negative, both fungal and pass. Also, we had done a reticulin stain, and these were retic-rich granulomas, as a result of which we had established the diagnosis of sarcoidosis. Another biopsy from the minor salivary gland was also sent for this patient, showing similar findings. There was salivary gland parenchyma showing, along with non-necrotizing granulomas, which were rich in giant cells, were mostly naked, did not have a lymphocytic cuffing around them. So again, special stains were done on these, but I've shown you the images of the better one, and a diagnosis of sarcoidosis was made on these biopsies. Thank you.
So after this biopsy, we have finally the summary of our patient. Clinically, we had 24-year-old lady with a fever, dry cough, bilateral uveitis, erythema nodosum, parotid and submandibular swelling bilaterally with history of dry mouth, with polyuria, loss of weight and large joint arthralgias. In investigation, we have hypercalcemia, hypercalciuria, elevated ACE levels, decreased urine osmolality with normal serum osmolality, with bulky parotid and submandibular gland bilaterally with bilateral periventricular thickening, and some centilobular nodules with left upper ureter calculus and nephrolithiasis, and a biopsy showing non-necrotizing epithelial granuloma. So, to looking at our initial diagnosis, differential diagnosis which we have kept, IG4 related disease is now ruled out. HIV was negative, no history was corroborating to it. Lymphoma was essentially ruled out by the biopsy, and Sjogren syndrome, which was a close diagnosis, was not fulfilling the criteria, as the 20 roll are negative, and biopsy is typically showing beautiful epithelioid granulomas with multinuclear giant cells. So to discuss my diagnosis, polyuria is seen in sarcoidosis cases around 10% with 2% patient showing central diabetes insipidus, 4% nephrogenic diabetic insipidus with some polydipsia patient also there. Hypercalcemia, hypercalciuria, nephrolithiasis and non-necrotizing granulomas has been described in varying frequency with sarcoidosis. So final diagnosis of sarcoidosis with multiple system involvement, especially pulmonary, ocular, salivary glands, renal and urosarcoidosis causing polyuria. So now coming on to management and follow-up part of this patient. Patient was started on prednisolone 1 mg per kg per day, around 50 mg per day prednisolone was started. Methotrexate 15 mg once a week with folic acid 5 mg twice a week was started. And with that, patient is showing symptomatic improvement. Submandibular swelling has been resolved. Improvement in dry mouth is there, and patient has shown weight gain of 5 kg with urine output coming down to 1.6 liter per day, and patient is currently afebrile. So this is the pics of the patient before the treatment, and now after the treatment there is no submandibular swelling. Now I will call Dr. Sandeep sir.
Thank you, Dheeraj. Now we'll discuss the review of literature of sarcoidosis. Sarcoidosis is a heterogeneous multisystem disorder of unknown etiology characterized by presence of non-case-eating granuloma. It is more common in black population, followed by Caucasian, and less common in Asian. It has slight female predominance, and the median age of onset is 40 years. There is no exact cause of sarcoidosis found yet. However, few studies have shown that exposure to organic and inorganic environmental materials and infectious agents like Mycobacterium tuberculosis and Propionibacterium acne can lead to sarcoidosis. And in genetic association, HLA gene products and non-HLA gene products have seen significant association in sarcoidosis. Important HLAs are HLA B1 1101, which plays important role in the antigen presentation of mycobacterial antigen ESET6 and MCAT G gene. HLA DR B103 associated with the milder form of disease like Lofgren syndrome, and it usually has a benign course and spontaneous resolution is common. HLA DR B101 and GR04 have been shown protective effect in sarcoidosis. Sarcoidosis is characterized by formation of granuloma, which can be explained by in 4 stages: initiation, amplification, effector, and resolution phase. In the initiation phase, antigen presenting cells collected around the airways where they get encounter with the triggering antigen. These antigens get processed and presented to naive T cells inside the lymph nodes, where amplification of T helper 1 and T helper 17 cells takes place. These cells migrate to the site of granuloma formation with the help of various interleukins. Inside the granuloma, core is made up of macrophages, epithelioid cells, and T helper 1 cells, which is surrounded by T helper 17 fibroblast and CD8 positive cells. In clinical features, pulmonary involvement is most common, which is seen in 95% of cases. Other commonly involved organs are eye, lymph node, liver, joint, skin, and less common involved organs are heart, nervous system, parotid, kidney, and GIT is the least commonly involved organ. Pulmonary involvement is again divided into 4 stages on the basis of radiographic finding. In stage 1, there is mediastinal and hilar lymphadenopathy without any pulmonary infiltrates. In stage 2, mediastinal and hilar lymphadenopathy along with pulmonary infiltrates are seen. In stage 3, pulmonary infiltrates without adenopathy is seen. In stage 4, there will be pulmonary fibrosis with volume loss without any adenopathy. Characteristic features of uveitis are it is bilateral in 90% of cases, and it has similar findings and similar course in both eyes. It has female predominance, and acute form is common in youth and chronic form is seen in elderly patients. Specific findings in uvea are mutton fat creative precipitates, posterior iris synecdoche, Koppe nodules, trabecular sarcoidosis, snowball opacities or string of pearls in vitreous, segmental periphlebitis, and candle wax dripping. Diagnosis of ocular sarcoidosis is based upon 7 clinical signs and 5 laboratory signs. On the basis of these signs, it is divided into definite, probable, and possible diagnosis. Now, neurosarcoidosis is less common presentation of sarcoidosis. Prevalence is 3 to 10%. In 90% of cases, it is associated with systemic sarcoidosis. Cranial nerve involvement is most common presentation of neurosarcoidosis, which is seen in 25 to 50% of cases. Out of cranial nerves, 7th cranial nerve seen in 70% of cases, usually unilateral, but it could be bilateral with the advancement of disease. Optic neuropathy can be involved in 7 to 35% of cases. Vestibulocochlear nerve in 3 to 10% of cases, and least commonly involved cranial nerves are cranial nerve 3, 6, and 4. Mechanism of cranial nerve involvement is direct granulomatous infiltration or extension from basal leptomeninges or compressive neuropathy due to dural inflammatory masses. Peripheral neuropathy is seen in 10 to 15% of cases in the form of sensory motor or sensory axonal neuropathy, mono, poly, or mononeuritis multiplex, small fiber neuropathy, autonomic neuropathy. Mechanism is same in the form of epineural granulomatous inflammation or perivascular infiltration of granuloma. Meningitis is another common feature of neurosarcoidosis, which can present in the form of pachymeningitis, leptomeningitis, or direct vascular involvement. Pachymeningitis usually involve basal region or convexities and present in the form of nodular masses or plaque-like lesion, and clinically it presents in the form of headache, focal neurological deficit, seizure, cavernous sinus syndrome. Leptomeningitis, which is common and seen in around 75% of cases, predominantly involve basal region and diencephalon and brain stem. It usually associated with hydrocephalus and severe encephalopathy. Because of this, the course of leptomeningitis is rapid and more disabling than pachymeningitis. Meningitis can involve vascular structures if leptomeningeal inflammation is spread to parenchyma. Sometimes it can involve medium to small size arteries and can lead to infarction. In few cases, inflammation of small veins can occur, which can lead to lobar hemorrhage or subarachnoid hemorrhage. Seizures are also common. It is seen in 7 to 22% of cases. In 10% of cases, seizure can be the presenting feature of sarcoidosis. Seizures usually have poor prognosis, and mechanism of seizures are leptomeningeal infiltration, pachymeningeal masses, metabolic disturbances, or small vessel vasculitis. Spinal cord and cauda equina involvement can be seen in 2 to 20% of cases in the form of subacute spinal cord lesion, single cervical or longitudinally extensive thoracic lesions, pachymeningeal lesions in the form of compressive myelopathy, cauda equina syndrome, or descending root involvement. Hypothalamic and pituitary involvement are less common presentation, usually present with the systemic form of sarcoidosis. Panhypopituitarism is common presentation, seen in 4% of cases, and diabetes insipidus in 2% of cases. It can also present in the form of visual field defect, hyperprolactinemia, decreased LH, FSH, and testosterone level. Central diabetes insipidus is less common presentation of sarcoidosis. It mostly presents with hypothalamic and anterior pituitary involvement. Mechanism is due to granulomatous infiltration or due to fibrosis. It presents with fatigue, polydipsia, polyuria, and anterior pituitary hormone deficiency. MRI manifestations are not characteristic for central diabetes insipidus. Because of this, isolated neurosarcoidosis requires brain biopsy. And in the treatment, pituitary lesions regress with the steroids, but polyuria remains persistent. Natural course of neurosarcoidosis is variable. It is monophagic in 60% of cases, relapsing remitting in 30% of cases, and progressive disease with episodic exacerbations in 10% of cases. It usually requires treatment for 2 to 5 years. Early stoppage of treatment can lead to relapse in a higher percentage of patients. Treatment usually is stopped after the resolution of MRI changes. Still, there are chances of relapse in 10% of cases. Mortality is high in neurosarcoidosis. It is around 18%. Indicators of neurosarcoidosis: CSF soluble interleukin receptor 2 has seen 93% accuracy for the untreated neurosarcoidosis. It can distinguish neurosarcoidosis from multiple sclerosis or other non-inflammatory neurological diseases. It also associated with clinical, radiological, and CSF disease activity. And elevated CSF CD4 and CD8 count, CD8 ratio, and interleukin 6 concentration also associated with neurosarcoidosis. Elevated interleukin 6 concentration is associated with relapse or progression of neurosarcoidosis. Renal involvement is less common presentation of sarcoidosis. It can present in the form of hypercalcemia, hypercalciuria, nephrolithiasis, nephrocalcinosis, or granulomatous interstitial nephritis, which is the specific finding in sarcoidosis, and it is the most common renal lesion on biopsy. Other less common presentations are membranous, minimal change, FSCS, and precentric glomerulonephritis. Usually response to steroids is good. Nephrogenic diabetes insipidus in sarcoidosis. It is because of granulomatous involvement of renal parenchyma or non-specific glomerulonephritis with basement membrane thickening. Nephrolithiasis or nephrocalcinosis can lead to nephrogenic diabetes insipidus. Usually, nephrogenic diabetes insipidus have favorable response to steroids. Diagnosis of sarcoidosis is based upon specific clinical findings, evidence of non-caseating granuloma, and exclusion of other causes. Diagnosis of neurosarcoidosis is divided into definite, probable, and possible on the basis of suggestive clinical presentation, positive histopathology, and exclusion of other diagnosis. Diagnosis of diabetes insipidus. There is no definite criteria for the diagnosis of diabetes insipidus. It is based upon clinical features like polyuria, polydipsia, and decreased urinary osmolality, positive water deprivation test, increased basal AVP level, and increase in urine osmolality with desmogletion treatment. MRI findings which are non-specific but hypothalamic hyperintensities and pituitary stalk thickening can be seen. Treatment of sarcoidosis. In every patient, treatment is not required because it has variable course. In 30% of cases, it resolves spontaneously. In 30% of cases, it becomes progressive, and in 30% of cases it relapses. Treatment is indicated for the disabling symptoms or progressive symptoms or life or organ threatening disease only. Steroids are the cornerstone of treatment. It can be used in the topical or systemic forms depending upon the severity and system involvement. Steroid sparing agents like methotrexate, leflunomide, azathioprine, mycophenolate mofetil, hydroxychloroquine and cyclophosphamide have been used, and TNF alpha inhibitors has shown a role in the refractory disease. Methotrexate, which is used most commonly in sarcoidosis, has shown 63% response in systemic sarcoidosis, and there is high chances of relapse around 50% after 2.5 years of treatment. MMF, which has also been tried, but it has higher chances of relapse as compared to methotrexate. Cyclophosphamide is a good drug. It is used in the form of intermittent IV infusions for severe systemic sarcoidosis, and infliximab has been used for refractory sarcoidosis, and the response rate was 70%. Treatment of central diabetes insipidus is not specific. Corticosteroids are used till the resolution of MRI changes, and intranasal desmopressin is used for polyuria. Return of normal endocrine function is unusual because of damage due to inflammation or sarcoidosis. These patients usually require desmopressin therapy for lifelong. Now I would like to thank my patient, my colleagues from radiology and pathology department.